Out of all the games that you should play before you die, Cry of Fear tops that list for all the wrong reasons. Cry of Fear is a game I've replayed countless times, despite the fact that playing it is not fun at all.
Oh! What the hell?
Playing Cry of Fear is an experience full of anxiety and dread, no matter how many times you think you've gotten used to it. Every time you think the gameplay starts to become monotonous, the game throws something new at you, whether that be a gun, enemy, or puzzle. And while its gameplay is incredibly well made, that's not what I like about Cry of Fear. What I like about Cry of Fear is something that seemingly every other video on this game either seems to briefly skim over or miss entirely. In my opinion, Cry of Fear is the best representation of severe depression, clinically known as major depressive disorder, as I believe it does an excellent job at showing just how harrowing depression really is. Major depressive disorder is the medically accepted term for the big sad. It is also the most common mental illness in the world, with roughly 145 million sufferers. In this video, I aim to walk you through the game, explaining the symbolism as it happens. To do this, however, I will be spoiling the story of Cry of Fear to paint a better picture of what's happening and how it pertains to depression. So take this as your final warning. If you love horror games, especially survival horror games, you should stop watching this video and play Cry of Fear for yourself. It's completely free on Steam and can run on essentially any computer. Alright, now with all that out of the way, let's get into what makes Cry of Fear the most accurate depiction of depression in any video game.
I've always felt alone. My whole life. For as long as I can remember. I don't know if I like it or if I'm just used to it. But I do know this. Being lonely does things to you. And feeling shit and bitter and angry all the time just eats away at you.
Cry of Fear is a Half-Life 1 mod that was developed by Team Psychotic running on GoldSource, a game engine 4 years older than I am. It is the second game in a series of psychological horror games made by Rumpel, the lead developer. Before this, Rumpel would create another classic Half-Life mod known as Afraid of Monsters, a game where an opium addict named David Leatherhoff checks into rehab to treat his addiction to an unknown painkiller. Originally, since the model used in-game is the same exact model used in Max Payne, I expected this to be codeine, due to the dosing information provided by the Max Payne wiki. However, once David takes this mysterious drug, he flies into a psychotic episode. Seeing regular people as monsters trying to kill him, he stabs and shoots his way through the city before snapping out of it, leaving a pile of bodies behind him. However, opiates do not usually cause hallucinations, especially not codeine. Due to this, I actually did some digging and found pentazocine, an opiate that fell out of favor specifically for its tendency to induce hallucinations. It's likely that David Leatherhoff was a part of an experimental drug trial that preyed on desperate addicts to use them as guinea pigs to study the effect, leading to disastrous consequences. While Afraid of Monsters isn't an especially noteworthy game for its story, it would familiarize Rumpel with the tools he would use to create his magnum opus, Cry of Fear. Now teaming up with Minwi and a group of enthusiastic developers, Rumpel would form Team Psychotic and diligently work on Cry of Fear, going as far as to travel to abandoned buildings to take pictures to use as textures, all to create an environment that is as depressing and brutally realistic as the GoldSource engine would allow it to be. In the game, you play as Simon Henriksson, a 19-year-old man who suffers from severe depression and anxiety in the form of panic attacks. To get his mind off his mental troubles and a recent heartbreak, Simon regularly takes the train from his rural hometown to Sweden's capital, Stockholm, for late-night walks in solitude. During one of these walks, he sees a man crawling on the floor in need. Naturally, Simon goes to help the man, only to be struck by a car in a hit-and-run, crippling him permanently from the waist down. Now spiraling even further into his depression, he is admitted into a mental hospital where a doctor asks him to write down his thoughts and life story in a book as a part of cognitive behavioral therapy, hoping to help Simon cope with the loss of his legs. It is a Simon depicted in the book that we end up playing as in the game, allowing us to return to a version of Simon that still has control of his legs. This is where our story begins, not awaking from a tomb as some mythical hero, but in a dirty alley, alone and afraid with only 3 things: a phone, a pocket knife, and a text from your mother, asking you to return home. Making your way through the first few twists and turns of the city, we take notice of two things: the filth and rundown appearance of urban Stockholm, and the distinct lack of anyone else on the street. Usually in cities, you will still see pedestrians on their way to work, on an early shift, or walking home after a long night out with some friends. But here, we're all alone. There should be people out here, but it seems as though everyone's either disappeared or is making a conscious effort to avoid us. The loneliness in Cry Fear is not regular loneliness, however. Throughout the game, we can come across many scenes of the beautiful Scandinavian city at night, where we can see countless buildings with their lights on. There are people out there in their homes, but they always seem just out of reach, maybe representing Simon's feelings of isolation from the rest of society. This leads us into Cry Fear's first accurate depiction of what it's like to live with depression and its cause: loneliness. Humans are social creatures. It is necessary that we interact with others on a daily basis, as we are hardwired to stay in a group and work together. However, Simon doesn't seem to have these social connections. If anything, it seems Simon isolates himself from others, making his depression much worse. This entire first section, where enemies don't spawn, is likely a representation of what Simon must have felt like walking around Stockholm alone late at night. The only people on the streets tonight is Simon and the manifestation of his demons, the first of which we can only catch glimpses of while he stalks you, luring Simon into a trap where he attacks us with a hammer, trying to break our bones like the car that crippled Simon. These normal enemies, or slowers, are not too important to the story, however. They're likely just there to serve as cannon fodder to wear down Simon throughout the game. Our next enemy suggests something far bleaker. For now, we must make our way through the sewer to get back to the surface, where we must enter an apartment to progress. The apartments are, in my opinion, Cry Fear's most well-designed level. Surprisingly, it's actually a one-to-one recreation of a real apartment in Stockholm called Högbergsgatan 59. As we find out later in the story, this is the building Simon moved to after the crash, as he needed a home closer to the doctor for regular checkups meant to help Simon. We can even find Simon's room, covered in blood, police tape, and emanating a muffled screaming and pounding from the other side. This move, however, would prove to be a very bad idea, as the apartment Simon lives in ends up being one of the factors driving him down into his depression. Environment is very important for anyone's well-being. If you live in a small poverty-ridden town in Siberia, where the sun only sticks around for about 4 hours a day, it's obviously going to take a toll on your mental health. But for someone like Simon, who's already struggling as it is, the misery encapsulated in this building does him no favors. The apartments have some history, as throughout the building we can find notes made by a serial killer who would target, quickscope, and dispose of multiple innocent children who lived there with their parents. These children manifest themselves as the enemy in the game who attacks us with knives. This enemy is visualized as reanimated corpses of children who have been stuffed into trash bags. We can also find the mothers of these children, initially only hearing them cry behind a locked door.
Alright, see you later.
If the serial killer really did hurt the children of the other residents, it would make sense for them to grieve the loss of their child. But for Simon, it's just another side of misery that seems to permeate his life. Once we do finally have the pleasure of fighting one of these mothers, their appearance is quite telling. First things first, they clearly resemble a middle-aged woman in a dress, but her arms and legs have both been replaced with bloodied sharp metal spikes, which she uses to stab Simon in order to hurt him. These metal arms and legs also give the monsters their signature sound, being a loud metallic clank as she runs towards you, combined with her various harrowing screeches. These metallic legs and arms likely represent how Simon feels about his wheelchair, which makes him feel less like a human as he relies on metal equipment to live a normal life. One final interesting detail to mention is her death animation. This is an important thing to take note of as it ties into the game's main theme I'll be discussing later. Progressing through the apartments, unlocking various rooms and floors as we go, we finally take the elevator towards the basement where we can encounter our first boss fight. Tsar is a horrific creature. Frail but agile, he kills you with a single swing of his chainsaw, making any attempt for Simon to catch his breath impossible. In appearance, he resembles what I imagine XQC looks like after a 12-hour stream.
Wait, is jellyfish a herb?
Hell no, man. What?
Frail, but tall with long and skinny limbs. He also has pins stuck through his body. One last important note about Tsar is that upon landing a hit on Simon, he one-shot kills you by sawing Simon's body in half, being a clear reference to Simon's accident.
Better scramble like an egg before you get folded like an omelet, nigga.
After we beat Tsar, we have our first interaction with Simon's therapist, Dr. Purnell.
Did I pass out? Huh? Who's that?
Relax. I am not one of them.
Who are you then?
I'm nobody.
What?
You shouldn't be here. It's very dangerous.
Wait, why are you wearing a gas mask?
Are you stupid or something? Do I look like I want to turn into one of them? I can't trust you. I don't know if you're real. Just leave me alone.
What the?
It is important to note that the game tries to gaslight the player into believing that this world is simply suffering from an outbreak of some kind, leading to the doctor wearing a gas mask. In reality, this is just meant to sow distrust between the player and the doctor, giving the player an insight into Simon's skepticism around the efficacy of therapy. He doesn't attempt to explain himself, nor does he try to hurt Simon. To Simon, his doctor is still untrustworthy. Whether or not we can overcome this trust issue is a deciding factor in Simon's fate. Generally, doctors or bad therapists may seem jaded or unsympathetic, fueling distrust in patients. In Simon's case, it is likely that he doesn't see much reason in the therapy sessions provided to him, viewing them as ultimately meaningless, which, as we find out later, hampers the therapy process entirely. Now, leaving the miserable apartments, we get some fresh air and are tasked with a puzzle that requires us to call a self-nay prevention hotline, something that Simon likely attempted or even tried when he was in his darkest hour, helping us unlock a door but not offering any further assistance. This may or may not be a criticism of the temporary solution brought by calling a self-nay prevention hotline. I, however, doubt it. Briefly crawling out of the sewers to progress, we come across two rare sights: a crashed police car with blood on it, and a stitched up sack of meat on an operating table that pulsates in place. The police car is likely there to give credibility to the zombie outbreak, but the stitched up sack of meat is undoubtedly there to represent how Simon felt on the operating table, viewing himself as just another piece of flesh for them to stitch up. Making our way further through the underground, come across the shotgun of a Nirvana stan, who, luckily for us, won't be needing it anymore. More importantly, next to it, we also get a lighter. Using the lighter on a pack of cigarettes, we'll play a short cutscene where Simon has a moment to himself for a smoke. Smoking calms anxiety for many reasons, most prominently because of the nicotine, but also because it forces smokers to calm their breath as they smoke. This is something that Simon and many others found as something to rely on during stressful days. As we can see later in a cutscene, the real Simon is also a heavy smoker, especially after the accident. Progressing further, we encounter our first nightmare sequence, where Simon is likely having another mental episode in real life. Psychosis is a medically accepted term used for what you would call insanity. Psychosis is a temporary state of mind where a person may perceive or believe in things that are not real. This can cause extremely dangerous situations, as the sufferer does not show any level of self-preservation during the episode, leading to them trying things that may result in death, such as flying without a plane. Throughout the game, Simon will briefly have these episodes where he writes frantically in his book, transforming the world we play in into a nightmarish hell. Here, we can see some of Simon's intrusive thoughts that drag him down and hurt him mentally, beating himself up for things he can't change until he has thoughts of unaliving himself. We also get ourselves into a chase scene, in which we must escape hands that come up from the floor, trying to pull Simon down to their level into the darkness below him. Eventually, escaping the chase, we get another flashback of the incident's aftermath, surrounded by fire trucks and police cars, inspecting the hit and run scene, and tending to Simon while he's pinned to a wall by the car. Coming back down to Earth, Simon gets another text from his mother expressing how worried she is about Simon. This is something that likely happened to Simon in real life, whether walking home late at night or after seeing some of Simon's more destructive tendencies. Luckily for us, the devs included a funny Swedish impact font meme to help raise our spirits after what we just went to. Kaniner! Jalla Hanskar Kaniner! Why'd I go French? Just barely making our way past this monstrosity, we are rewarded with our first real Saw Runner chase, as he bursts through the door and chases Simon till he either kills him or escapes with his life. The Saw Runner is easily my favorite and least favorite enemy at the same time, as he has one very simple yet brutal objective. Anxiety. The Saw Runner is the embodiment of a panic attack, always coming out of nowhere and making you feel like you're going to die. He has the simplest and best representation of anxiety I've ever seen. If you want to know what it's like to have a panic attack, play Cry of Fear and encounter the Saw Runner. Appearance-wise, he's a blood-soaked man similarly dressed to Simon, who moves incredibly quickly while flailing around a chainsaw. His most interesting feature is undoubtedly his head. His head is a mangled mess, covered up by masks called the sock and buskin. These masks are ancient Greek symbols for comedic tragedy, one being happy and the other sad. This could represent a couple of things. The wiki theorizes that these represent Simon's mask that he puts on around people to stop them from worrying about him. In my opinion, it's likely just a representation of how Simon feels about his mental state, as a mess that he's barely keeping together while his true feelings can be seen under the cracks. Escaping the Saw Runner by leaping over a ledge, we can make our way to the Wasp Pit Gardens. Here, Simon gets a call from an unknown woman, instructing us to come to the rooftop of a nearby building.
Unprotected furry intercourse.
Initially, we may think this is Simon's mother, but once we make our way up there, we realize that it is instead Simon's love interest, a girl called Sophie. Before we can get to her, however, we will need to shoot a couple of new monsters blocking our way. The most interesting of which are the Flygars, the only flying non-boss enemy in the game. Flygar's appearance is quite on the nose, being that of a monster who flies around on a rusty bed to which he's strapped to. Restraining someone to a bed is typically done when that individual is a threat to others or themselves. This is another undoubtable nod to the other mental asylum patients Simon encountered. Or it could also be how Simon felt about being bedridden in the hospital, lashing out at nurses and doctors for giving him false hope about his legs. The Flygar has two ways of attacking Simon. The most obvious one is the two pairs of scissors he tries to stab you with. The other one is his mouth, using spit to hurt Simon from a distance. There's one more subtle detail of the Flyers which I'll restrain myself from mentioning now, as this topic can be seen throughout the game and many other places. For now, let's make our way up to the rooftop and try to save Sophie.
What the? Sophie? What the hell are you doing here?
Oh, hi, Simon.
What? I don't understand anything now.
What is it that you don't understand?
What do you think? The whole fucking city is crawling with monsters and suddenly you just turn up on these rooftops?
Oh, monsters? Simon, you're scaring me.
Scaring? Oh, what the fuck?
Sophie seems completely oblivious to the world around her, indicating that this interaction is either not real or a condensed version of conversations the two have had in the past. We learn that Simon and Sophie met in school and bonded over the fact that Simon would help her with bullies. During this sit-down, Simon also confesses his love for Sophie, only for her to reject him. Simon handles this surprisingly well at first, but when Sophie leaves Simon metaphorically by jumping off the roof in the game, his true emotions shine through as another boss called Carcass emerges from her body to serve as a representation of Simon's grief. This is the most important boss fight in the game. How we decide to handle Carcass will reflect how Simon got over Sophie in real life. You see, Simon has committed a cardinal sin in the book of getting bitches. He's a simp! During another flashback, we can see a heartbroken Simon literally begging on his knees for Sophie to reciprocate his love. This first heartbreak, while inconsequential, is understandably devastating to Simon. This is because he idolized her as the perfect girl and thinks that no one else would be like her, instead of realizing that she is one of thousands of fantastic women in a massive sea of hoes. Due to this, Simon would have an extremely hard time moving on, likely judging himself even before the accident. Afterwards, things only got worse for Simon. Carcass is the embodiment of Simon's incel rage, raging at himself, raging at his legs, and raging at the fact that Sophie won't accept him. This is visually shown through Carcass's body, being a chubby creature bound to a chair which he uses to fly around, whose only means of harming you is the acid he spits from his mouth. Carcass is also important for another reason. He is the only boss in the game that allows you to run away from him by jumping back down from the roof. If you do, Simon doesn't move on from Sophie, letting his emotions fester until he snaps at the end of the game, choosing to take Sophie with him instead of moving on, going to the gym, getting some paper, and maybe adopting a dog for good measure. But if you do kill Carcass, Simon sees the light, leaving his simping ways and accepting Sophie's decision like an adult. Climbing down and finding Sophie's body, we get the aforementioned simp flashback and gather a keycard lying next to her, allowing us to continue making our way home. On our way, we also come across the worst gun in the game, the Henriksson VP-70. The VP-70 was the first double-stack polymer frame pistol in the world, beating the Glock 17 by 12 years. Intended for law enforcement, it is a semi-automatic handgun with the ability of a 3-round burst, added by the accompanying holster, which doubles as a stock. In the game, it's just as bad as it is in real life, especially considering you can't switch off the 3-round burst in a game where ammunition is scarce. Overall, use the VP-70 like a one-night stand. Use it once to great effect, and then never touch it again. Or better yet, have some dignity and throw it to the curb to make your Glock feel extra special. Besides, you'll need the extra inventory space for our next area of importance, the college. The college is one of the most interesting areas in the game. It's actually a 1-to-1 replica of the cyber gymnast Odenplatz, which Rumpel attended while making Cry of Fear. In fact, we also learned that this map was made by Rumpel as a school project so that he could work on Cry of Fear during his school time. But what's most interesting about it are the enemies. These enemies only show up after we grab a fuse, which powers down the building. This is almost identical to the start of Afraid of Monsters, making it an extremely nerve-wracking experience as Simon struggles to find his way out. The only enemies that spawn here are the new faceless enemies who attempt to swarm Simon in groups. The wiki explains that these are representations of Sophie, since the monster's appearance is somewhat feminine, but I disagree. These faceless enemies likely represent the other students and possibly the social anxiety that Simon has around them. We know Simon is a Sigma. He doesn't like to interact with others. Intimacy and friendship may be somewhat unnerving to Simon. These monsters could also be Simon's resentment towards the other students, resenting them for not helping him while he's clearly struggling. In reality, it can be difficult to detect depression, especially at first sight. The other students likely didn't know that Simon was struggling instead of knowingly not helping. This resentment likely feeds into Simon's feelings of isolation from the rest of society, making him feel more and more detached from quote-unquote normal people. Normal people that Simon likely saw every day in our next area, the subway.
What do you mean I can't have cum on it?
Entering the subway, we have the privilege of having the battery go empty for our only source of light, our phone. Instead, the game gives us flares that only light up what's directly around us. As we make our way through the inner workings of the subway system, we get chased by a new enemy called citalopram. Citalopram is the name of the 31st most prescribed drug in the USA. It's an antidepressant of the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor class, a part of the extremely effective next generation of antidepressants like sertraline. These SSRIs work by blocking the reuptake of long-term happiness chemicals called serotonin, causing more of it to stay in the patient's system, relieving depression symptoms. And while these are extremely effective in most cases, even helping to reduce anxiety, SSRIs are also known to cause anxiety at high doses. This is where the enemy gets its name from, as it runs towards Simon with panicked breathing as soon as they spot him. Battling off the monsters who don't breathe as good, we have another encounter with the doctor, where we see him shoot an innocent-looking man, seemingly uncaring about the well-being of others. However, he does help Simon, as he leaves us extremely useful items, including a spare battery for our phones, some hunting rifle and VP-70 rounds, a key, as well as some heroin for good measure.
Joe, I need the heroin.
You'll get it, Mick.
I need the heroin, Joe.
All right.
Joe, I need the heroin.
Okay, Mick.
Give me the heroin, Joe.
It's almost as if he wants us to give chase. Either way, following in the doctor's footsteps may be the only way home. To follow the doctor, first we need to retrieve 2 fuses obtained by backtracking, taking us back to the apartments. This time, the building is in a deep state of disarray, with most of the basement flooded and the walls and floors even dirtier than before, no doubt reflecting Simon's declining worldview and mental state. Here, we also get to finally visit Simon's apartment that was previously covered up by police tape. Now, it's soaked in blood, with only a ladder in the center of the room. Going down it, we go deeper into Simon's mind. Down here, we gain an extra insight into Simon's real-life state. This is presented via a monologue made by Simon's doctor, in which he explains that he's upping Simon's prescription of citalopram in order to help him with his hallucinations.
He told me the other day that he'd been seeing hallucinations, but couldn't give a clear description of what he'd been seeing. Naturally, I didn't take him seriously. I saw no evidence to suggest this was the case, but upped his prescription anyway. He claims the extra medication helps.
In reality, this overdose of SSRI antidepressants is making Simon more manic. However, the doctor still ups his prescription anyways, since Simon seems treatment resistant, leaving him with no choice. We also learn that Simon goes back to the location of his accident for therapeutic reasons. However, all this likely does for Simon is to stop him from moving on and wallow in his own self-pity. We can also hear the doctor's voice actor botch this line due to a Skype message, which we can hear in one of the hidden creator commentaries.
Det seems to have gone out of... Fan ta dig, Andreas. Helvete!
We also enter another nightmare sequence where Simon is chased in the dark, ending with a return to a well-lit area, signifying Simon's return to reality. With the fuses collected, Simon does the only thing he can think of, attempting to board a train back to his hometown called Kirkville. To get the train in working order, however, we will need to enter another nightmare sequence. This quite possibly being the most interesting one. As we slip into insanity, the train station around us morphs into a contorted mess of platforms surrounded by wailing creatures in cages who, let's just say, are actively playing Fruit Ninja on their wrists, some even managing to amputate their arm completely off out of self-hatred. The platform we walk on is likely a representation of Simon's chaotic thoughts, twisting and turning, only barely being connected to one another. These platforms lead to a short hallway with barred windows, a common trait of mental hospitals to avoid patients from attempting to fly away from their problems. We also enter a padded cell with 4 doors. These rooms are typically reserved for patients who are a danger to others or themselves. Our escape from this nightmare only comes about after a maze filled with hanging enemies, predictably called hangmen, which kill Simon if they come in contact with him. The symbolism of these enemies is not quite clear to me, or the wiki. Quite frankly, all I can come up with is that they resemble Simon's restrained and captured state. This is backed up not only by the flashback that we have of Dr. Purnell talking to the police, as well as the fact that he trips and crawls out of the maze as if he remembered his legs were broken. Finally boarding the train to our hometown Kirkville, after that awful nightmare, Simon actively questions his sanity and the few moments of peace he has on the train. The train is something that we see Simon use multiple times in the game, as he would regularly ride them either to college or for his late night strolls around Stockholm, affording him a few hours to clear his head, questioning the world around him, the doctor, Sophie, the monsters, and what he's going to do if he does get back home safe. But something tells me that this nightmare is not quite over yet. The train section of Cry of Fear is interesting for many reasons. I especially love how the scenery changes when going through the various train cars, starting in the tunnel to urban outskirts, and finally the forest. Another thing of note is the new enemy type, called Spitters, who burst through train windows and spit acid at Simon. Their appearance is once again quite telling, namely the blindfold they have on, which is a clear sign of I don't fucking know. Hey man, some things don't have symbolism. As much as I reach for straws that may or may not be there, this is one of those rare cases where I have no clue where to even start. But what is 100% symbolic is the goal of the train segment, which is to retrieve an amputated foot and place it inside a luggage case which demands it to be returned. This is a very clear-cut example of Simon's desire to regain the use of his legs. Not much more to it than that. Returning the foot to Simon, the train derails and leaves Simon on his own to brave the forest after losing all of the items he kept in his bag. The forest is the most horrific part of the game. Every time I replay Cry of Fear, this is the section I dread the most. Not only is it incredibly hard to find your way around the forest with your only source of light being a shitty lantern, but you're also forced to defend yourself with a literal stick. There isn't too much symbolism during this section, it's more so pure unadulterated dread. But there are two enemies in particular which do have some interesting implications. The first of which is the Hanger. The Hanger is a very simple enemy, being a monster who ambushes Simon if he strays too close to any of the trees during a particular segment. The way they inflict damage is by throwing themselves off a tree while aiming for Simon. If they manage to make contact with Simon, they will do some damage, however nay-naying themselves in the process. This monster has caused widespread speculation, some even claiming that since the Hanger's model is that of a woman, this could possibly be Simon's mother who texts us to come home, claiming that she nay-nayed herself in real life, causing Simon's depression in the first place. I highly disagree with this hypothesis. If Simon knew his mother was dead, he would have no reason to try and make it home, and she would have never been able to send him texts. Some say that this may simply be hallucinations by Simon, however, I don't buy it. What the Hanger is much more likely to represent is a concept of revenge-motivated self-nay-nay, as the Hanger attempts to harm Simon by taking their own life. Revenge is something that Simon clearly wants, something I think you'll agree with me on as soon as we cover the endings. The other enemy of note is the Upper. The Upper only appears once in the whole game, directly after going through a maze of slamming doors which threaten to kill Simon. The Upper resembles a crooked version of Simon, covered in blood and only able to attack by swinging his broken legs and walking on his hands. Upon seeing Simon, the Upper will let out a horrific scream of pain. This scream is likely Simon's scream from when he got hit by the car and heard his spine snap, as the Upper's legs are a contorted mess, much like Simon's after the crash. Escaping the horrific nightmare that is this game's forest section, we can see Dr. Purnell enter an abandoned mental hospital smack dab in the middle of nowhere. This mental hospital is based on the real-world Beckenberger Hospital. In its heyday, it was one of the largest mental hospitals in all of Europe. Now, it's a rotting husk, covered in graffiti from head to toe, with paint chipping off the walls and all rooms looted for furniture. This is a place that has touched countless lives. The textures Rumpel actually used for this map is in fact ripped from the real place as well, going out of his way to visit the place in the dark with nothing but a camera and presumably a big ass pair of nuts. Holy shit, this is terrifying. What the fuck? All in an attempt to truly capture just how harrowing and grimy these places are in real life. This is the place where Simon was sent to after the accident, in order for the doctors to more readily oversee his recovery, both mentally and physically. While the physical part of Simon's recovery went off without a hitch, the mental part is a lot harder to get right in a place like this. Throughout the level, we get various metaphors that tell us about what Simon's time here was like, the most important of which is the entire reason why we made our way into this hospital in the first place: the doctor. For the entire game, Simon has been viewing Dr. Purnell with some understandable suspicion, constantly showing himself to be someone who is not afraid of hurting Simon, but who also seems to want to help him. This is likely what Simon thought of Purnell over time. You see, Simon has a very specific and nasty type of depression, that being treatment-resistant depression. A special type of depression that is so severe it cannot be cured by powerful medication such as SSRIs alone. For Simon's mental therapy to be effective, he has to open up to Dr. Purnell about his past. Previously, it was very difficult, if not outright impossible, for the doctor to get Simon to speak about his issues, leading Purnell to ask Simon to write the very book that we are playing through right now. Whether or not it ends up helping Simon move on depends on what we do next.
Come over here so we can talk. I want to talk.
What the f*** do you want? You're crazy.
Come closer.
I'm close enough.
Come closer.
I can't. There's a big f***ing gate in the way.
That's why I want you to come closer. I'll help you open it.
How?
I need a gun.
You've got a gun! The subway. The guy you shot. Remember?
I want a new gun.
Upon meeting the doctor face to face, he asks us to help him retrieve a handgun from the asylum's bowling alley. Once handing this over, he will give us a key that will allow us to confront him. This handgun is the Ruger P345, a semi-automatic polymer-framed handgun chambered in .45 ACP, much like the 1911. The gun itself is not too interesting. The animations are slick, the powerful cartridge makes it useful, and overall, it's a serviceable gun. But what's truly interesting about it is what exactly it represents in the transaction it's involved in. This handgun represents Simon's pride. The same pride that tells him he can handle his mental issues on his own. The same pride that blames Sophie for not liking him back. And the same pride that leads Simon to his own demise. By handing over the P345, Simon lets go of his pride and accepts the responsibility of the situation he's in today, allowing Purnell to talk to Simon about his most sensitive topics and for Simon to overcome his trauma. While this will certainly help Simon in the long run, the short-term pain it causes Simon is very clearly reflected in gameplay, something we only find out about as soon as we make our choice. Whether or not we choose to give Purnell the gun, he still shoots Simon either way, permanently lowering his health for the rest of the game. What's different about the outcome of this decision is the amount of permanent damage the shot does to Simon. If you choose to give the gun to Purnell, in turn opening up to him in real life, you will shoot Simon with the more powerful P345, causing more damage. On the other hand, Simon can choose to stay resentful and closed off to Purnell, leading to less initial pain, but far more mental anguish in the future. This is one of Cry of Fear's most potent messages. Outside of the doctor, the mental hospital also shows what being around a bunch of other crazies is like. All throughout our time in this place, we can hear an insane man screaming down the hall, most likely coming from some unknown padded cell. We can also hear occasional banging on doors and the sobbing of women. And as someone who has spent time in a mental institute, this shit is on point. The constant screaming may be more of an exaggeration, but as you could imagine, being around a bunch of other motherfuckers who need bars in front of their windows doesn't exactly make you the happiest camper. Most people don't realize that the purpose of a mental hospital isn't to help you deal with your mental illness and get better. The point is to prevent people from hurting themselves or others who are at risk of doing so with constant 24/7 supervision. The paradox of these facilities is that they almost always make the symptoms worse, making the road to recover enough to leave even longer. Who knew that taking away someone's privacy, freedom, hobbies, and friends would take a toll on their mental? Either way, we head up to the attic to confront Purnell, leading to a short gunfight climaxing in Simon stomping Purnell into a pulp. The gunfight itself could serve as a metaphor for how tough the therapy was to go through, being a constant back and forth with the doctor trying to get Simon to cooperate. Eventually though, Simon gets released, and for one final time, Simon walks through the halls of the asylum. This time, the nightmarish screaming has been replaced with the sun coming out, and birds chirping. A quiet peace after a long storm. Leaving this place must have been a major accomplishment for Simon, whether it's for the improvement of his mental health or for the fresh breath of freedom. And just as it does in real life, stepping out of that nightmarish pit is a feeling of relief I can barely put into words. For the rest of the game, we're officially in the final stretch. The scene directly following our escape is that of Bliss. During this scene, Simon must cross a real-life lake known as Church Lake in a small wooden paddle boat. While a bit annoying on your 7th playthrough, this scene never fails to instill a level of tranquility into me. It's clearly a representation of the rare moments of peace in Simon's life. Whether it's stopping for a moment to take in nature or a sunset, these moments provide us with a temporary distraction from our problems in the future for what's in front of us in the present. And the music in this scene represents this perfectly. Music has this special ability to convey emotion without a single word ever being said, and the music in Cry of Fear takes full advantage of this, most commonly intensifying the anxiety of most scenes with a heavy thudding that robs the player of their breath. Here at the lake, the music does the opposite, playing a soothing beat with a dark undertone that tells us we might not be out of the woods just yet. This is mostly covered up by soothing sounds of water hitting the boat and the paddles pushing us forward, not to mention the sunrise reflecting off the water. Inevitably, we make it across the lake, and our short escape brings us back to reality. Finally, we have made it to Kirkville, Simon's hometown. It is here, in a quiet subsection, that we find it. The entire reason we made our way through those empty streets, train tracks, and woods is to get home to our mom, who's been texting us about her worries this entire time. However, once we make it inside, the building is empty.
Mom? Mom! Where are you? Mom! Mom!
It's interesting to note that Simon doesn't call for his dad, only his mom. This is likely because Simon's parents are either divorced or his mother is a widow. Alternatively, it could also just be the case of an asshole father, who left as soon as Simon's mom was pregnant. Either way, it's clear that Simon, much like any Twitter user, doesn't have a good father figure in their life.
Mental sickness.
Father figures are extremely important to a child's development. When children do not have someone to look up to or explain to them the various problems they will face, they'll have a lot harder time with life. This leads to not only higher chances of developing depression, but it also intensifies the depression, explaining why Simon's MDD is so treatment resistant. If Simon's father was in the picture, he would have definitely helped Simon date Sophie, or at the very least, accept her rejection. Not finding his mother anywhere, Simon looked further around the house, culminating when he checks on his room. There, he finds an open book on a chair, picks it up, and decides to put an end to it. There are 4 main endings in Cry of Fear. All of them are bad endings, but some of them are better than others. This is the very first time we leave the world of the book, returning to the real Simon. The real Simon looks a lot more weathered. With long, unkempt hair and a beard, he sits in a rusted old wheelchair. He is also still wearing a hoodie, although this one is brown instead of gray. This shows that Simon is still hiding his scars out of shame. Scars that you can see when you pull down your sleeves to inject morphine. Undoubtedly made with the switchblade at the beginning of the game. Let's just call them self-inflicted ouchies, or SIOs for short. People who have SIOs might do it as a cry for help, essentially showing people that they are neither incapable of or afraid of hurting themselves. However, if someone is hiding their SIOs, then they are likely seeking to feel something after feeling disassociated, essentially using the adrenaline to snap out of it. Others who hide their habit do to distract themselves from their situation, seeking momentary relief from depression and anxiety. For Simon, it's likely that he's doing it to escape from his trauma, due to the fact that he conceals his wounds with a hoodie rather than displaying them to the world. SIOs are an extremely common and reoccurring theme in Cry of Fear. In fact, some of the enemies themselves actually have SIOs on their body, most notably the Flygar, who was strapped to a bed specifically for the reason of preventing him from self-inflicting, not to mention the caged enemies during the subway nightmare sequence. These monsters are either A representation of what Simon is doing to himself during one of these psychotic episodes, or B, a representation of Simon's intrusive thoughts, telling him to self-inflict ouchies. Additionally, during Rumpel's section of the Cry of Fear DLC, Memories, we can actually see Simon hurting himself, showing us far more ouchies than the 4 lines we see when he pulls down his sleeves. Simon's apartment also gives us some extra details, the most notable of which being the trash on the ground, the used dishes in the kitchen, and the ashtray on the desk, filled with cigarettes. These small details show Simon's lack of motivation for anything, a core symptom of depression. His home at Kirkville is far cleaner, either because Simon's mental health took a sharp turn when he moved into the city, or his mother helped him clean up back when he lived at home. Now, Simon can't even find the strength to pick up trash in his own room. He starts by putting down the pen, picking up a Browning high power, and the topic of quickscoping yourself is the main and core theme of Cry of Fear. In fact, early during development, Rumpel wanted the game to consist of getting objectives from NPCs who are trying to do the forever sleep, only to find them dead after completing the objective. This idea did not end up in the final version of the game, however, so Rumpel instead decided to put in several references that explain the game's main theme. The first and most obvious reference to this theme are the enemies themselves. Most enemies fall to the ground when killed, ending the threat immediately. However, some enemies choose to take themselves out after you've done enough damage. The first of these enemies are Fasters. The second one is the boss of the apartments, Tsar, who upon beating him will lop off his own head with a chainsaw out of humiliation. Not to mention the Rider, who will shoot themselves in the head with their own gun if you get too close or they run out of ammo. The There's the embodiment of Simon's wrath, shaking with anger and aggressively hunting Simon down with every last round in their magazine. There's also the drowned enemy, who will use her powers to get Simon to turn his gun on himself while Simon weeps, resisting the urge. There are also far more abundant, subtle references, typically coming in the form of various ropes, tied into a certain shape that rhymes with moose. Now, these thoughts have finally taken a hold of Simon, encouraging him into an attempt. Here, we are transported into a mind of Simon just before he pulls the trigger, where we are constantly told to nay-nay ourselves, even by the soundtrack. Mustering enough courage will be rather difficult, however, leading to Book Simon navigating a void filled with branching structures and a jumping puzzle where Simon must jump on various floating copies of the book to reach his final destination. These books are open to a rather disturbing page, one that Simon likely wrote in a manic state with blood from his wrists. So, climbing on top of them, we take an elevator down to the deepest part of Simon's mind that is still fighting for his life. Here, we see sick Simon behind metal bars, using some sort of telekinesis to throw things at Book Simon, coming to kill him. To get to him, we must survive various waves of this onslaught. Before using some cranks, we were able to pull off the monsters killing us to open the gate protecting Simon. Now, after all Simon's been through, after all Simon has done to keep himself healthy and alive, to heal from his trauma and live a better life, he has failed, and come face to face with his darkest thoughts, who now takes advantage of Simon's moment of weakness to put himself out of his misery.
Dear Diary, this is it. I have ended my miserable life.
In this ending, the real Simon went completely off the deep end. After taking a very high dose of citalopram, Simon again flew into a state of psychosis, leading him to conclude that everyone, including the doctor and Sophie, is laughing at him behind his back, thinking of Simon as lesser of a human being because he's crippled, and only pretending to care. Simon's wrath and hatred he mentioned at the start of the game really gets put on display here, wishing death upon everyone and even hoping that the crime scene cleanup crew gets traumatized while cleaning up his body.
Have fun scraping my brains off the wall. Fuck you!
This is the worst of all endings. To get this, the player must both run away from Carcass and choose not to trust the doctor. If you do trust the doctor and don't kill Carcass, Simon will go full incel mode. During this ending monologue, Simon is far more depressed than angry, hating his crippled limbs and blaming them for everything wrong in his life, especially for hating how people treated him after the accident. He also claims that the doctor's therapy was helpful, but ultimately meaningless, even apologizing to Purnell for what he's done.
Purnell, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. There were no choices left. I made up my mind. Not everyone can be saved.
Since he ran away from Carcass, however, Simon never got over Sophie's rejection, claiming her as his own and taking her with him in the afterlife so nobody else could have her. Alternatively, if you help Simon get over Sophie by killing Carcass but reject Purnell's therapy, Simon will spiral into an even deeper hole he can't seem to dig himself out of, making every day a long and drawn-out nightmare that hurts to live through, concluding in him deciding he wants out.
My mind was stuck in a never-ending loop of anxiety, depression, and despair. A roller coaster with no end, and I want it out so bad!
But not before taking Purnell with him. As Simon didn't open up to Purnell about his personal life, his therapies were ineffective and even backfired. Due to this, Simon blames Purnell for all of his emotional anguish, even making him realize just how fucked up his life is by having it all laid out in front of him in the form of the book. He concludes that the only person who ever cared about him was Sophie, his best friend. He also apologizes to Sophie, only wishing that they don't show her what he's done. Overall, these are considered the bad endings for Simon, as in each one, Simon ends up dead. However, the fourth and final ending is a little bit different. This time, Simon puts down the pen and picks up the gun, only to be interrupted by Book Simon challenging him to a fight.
You eat all my beans, nigga!
The first thing you'll notice is just how slow the real Simon is. While bound to our wheelchair, we must hunt down and kill Book Simon, who at this point is extremely well armed with everything we picked up so far, leading to a final standoff where Book Simon is armed with a sledgehammer.
I stopped myself from doing it. From committing suicide. But it didn't only leave me alive. It also left 2 police officers dead. I killed them. Shot them both. This was not supposed to happen. Doctors testified that I was having a psychosis. Which means that my punishment won't be too hard for me to bear. I have to spend the rest of my life in a mental hospital, where nurses and doctors are taking care of me. They let me finish my book, and it has helped me a lot. I wrote a happy ending, just for myself. I feel better now. I am more at peace with myself, even though I'm still stuck in this wheelchair. But I accept that now. I can never forgive myself for shooting those 2 officers though. But I have so many supportive people around me now, so I think I will be okay. Dr. Purnell is mentoring me and is watching my progress. I am lucky to have him. Sophie visits me every once in a while. When the doctors let her, that is. They still think her visits are too destabilizing for me and that it hinders my progress. I keep on telling her how sorry I am for making her life miserable every time she's here. She just laughs a bit and tells me to stop being so silly. But I can see the damage I've done to her in her eyes every time she looks at me. She found a new friend, one who is there for her and treats her right. I'm happy for her, though I'll miss the good moments we've had, knowing that they'll never come back. I think this is a good time to close this book. It has changed my life forever. The end.
Simon snaps out of it alive, only to realize what he's just done. This is the closest Cry of Fear ever comes to a happy ending. No happy send-off where Simon gets the girl or prevents the hit and run. Just a slightly less awful outcome where Simon must be institutionalized for the rest of his life, never allowed to leave the care of the nurses and doctors overseeing him. He does, however, find peace with himself, forgiving himself for everything but the 2 deaths of the officers. This is why I love Cry of Fear. It's a story of pain and despair through and through. Even the best result is a horrible way to live, but Simon is still able to be happy in the end, even if it comes with some pretty heavy restrictions on his life. A broken man picking up the pieces of what he has left and making the best of it. It portrays life, especially life with depression, as it is. Planet Earth is a very brutal and hard place, and it will absolutely beat you to your knees if you let it. It is how you react act that changes your fate, even if it means going through a lot of pain. Even if you somehow had a miraculous life where you faced no obstacles and married your high school sweetheart, one of you is still going to die first, and the other one will die alone. It's up to us as individuals to help pick ourselves back up, even if it means taking a lot of assistance from other people. Only you can decide to move on from your crush. Only you can decide to open up to your therapist. And only you can decide to take that very first step to recovery from depression. It's a lot quicker than you think. And as someone who has had MDD, it very much makes me feel understood with how miserable this game makes you feel, and how realistic Simon's mental illness is portrayed. I'm sure I'm not the only one who can relate to Simon. Depression is a brutal thing to overcome, so as someone who has overcome it, I'd like to share with you some advice I'd give to Simon. Depression is one of the hardest things to give advice on because it's so easy to fuck up. What most people don't realize is that depression sucks all of the motivation out of you that's going to help you improve your life. Obviously, going to the gym is going to have a massive impact on your mental health, but that isn't really an option when it's a challenge to make it out of bed, let alone to a gym. So I'm going to focus on advice that is easy to implement while still remaining incredibly effective. If there's one thing I hate about Cry of Fear, it's its depiction of SSRIs. Because truthfully, if it wasn't for SSRIs, I wouldn't be here. This channel would not exist. I would not go to the gym, and wouldn't have stopped drinking, so I'd probably be dead. And it's a damn shame that Cry of Fear portrays it that way. Think of antidepressants as a ladder, and depression as a wall. It's not gonna pick you up and put you on the other side of it, but it is gonna make climbing it a heck of a lot quicker and easier. So if you take more of them, all you're doing is just putting more ladders on the wall and then asking yourself why you haven't climbed it yet. So for God's sake, Simon, try a different antidepressant. Stop taking more of it. It's clearly not working. Citalopram doesn't seem to be working for you. Personally, I take 100 milligrams of citrulline, and I could not be more grateful for the creator of this pill. Seriously, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, pause this video, call a doctor, or go to a parent and tell them you want to try SSRIs. It's gonna put you on a path that will permanently change your life forever. At least it did for me. Also, they make you last longer in bed. So if you're depressed because you come too fast, this one's really a slam dunk. Advice number 2, open your goddamn blinds. Fixing your sleeping schedule and being awake when the sun is out is fucking amazing for your mental health. The sun is seriously the best antidepressant. So much so that when you go to rehab or check into a mental institute, the very first thing they'll do is they'll try to fix your sleep schedule. So you should very much do the same if possible. Lastly, I have a piece of advice that isn't necessarily really that easy to do, but I personally think that Simon would benefit greatly from it. And that is to look into getting an emotional support animal, or at the very least a dog. Simon seems very lonely and like he doesn't go outside very much, both of which being things that dogs excel at. Not only do they give you company and make you feel better when you're depressed, they'll force you to go outside to let them go pee, which will make people talk to you, and obviously you're gonna see the sun. So yeah, I think Simon could benefit quite a bit from an emotional support animal. You know, I don't know you, I don't care about you, but I do hope this was some actually helpful advice in a sea of all this self-improvement nonsense. Then again, you know, I'm 21. If you go and ask your parents, hey dad, what were you like when you were 21? The answer is always the same: retarded. Stupid as f***. So as a 21-year-old, take everything I say with a pinch of salt. And if you're like me and you also overcame depression, and you know, you're maybe a little bit older, you got a little bit better advice, I'd love to hear it in the comments, and I'm sure a lot of other people would love to read it. So yeah. Sorry this video took 4 months to make. Holy fuck. I'm gonna be doing some more Fallout New Vegas next, so yeah. Thanks for watching.